hired Ryan Martinez at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The whole thing started with a handshake he refused to give. "I'm Timothy Johnson, 55 years old, and I watched a man destroy his career in 90 minutes because he thought experience was worthless and age was obsolescence." What he didn't know was that I'd spent 32 years building the company he was trying to run, and another 5 years making sure arrogant kids like him couldn't destroy it. The moment I reached across the boardroom table that morning, I knew this was going to end badly. Ryan glanced at my extended hand like it was contaminated, then looked around the room with that smirk young executives wear when they think they're the smartest person present. "We don't need to do the glad-handing thing," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is about results, not old-school networking." Old-school networking. That's what he called basic human respect. I didn't pull my hand back right away. Let him see exactly how this was going to play out. The red light on the camera blinked steadily in the corner. Everything recorded for investor transparency, which meant Martinez's dismissive attitude was being broadcast live to every major shareholder. "Fair enough," I said, settling into my chair with the briefcase that contained 32 years of building this company from a 12-person startup into a $3 billion industry leader. Ryan Martinez saw an old man with outdated ideas. He was about to learn the difference between authority and arrogance. The meeting was supposed to be routine. Approve the $850 million acquisition of our biggest competitor, Stream Tech Industries, rubber stamp the deal that would make Martinez look like a visionary, and send everyone home richer. I owned 18% of the stock, enough to matter, but not enough to block anything if the board was unified behind management. What Martinez didn't know was that I'd spent my final 5 years as CEO building safeguards into this company's governance structure. Call it paranoia. Call it wisdom. But I'd seen too many good companies destroyed by executives who thought disruption meant burning down everything that actually worked. "Let's start with the strategic overview," Martinez said, clicking to his first PowerPoint slide. He was 36 years old, Harvard MBA class of 2011, 18 months as CEO, and absolutely convinced that his generation had figured out business better than everyone who came before. The presentation was polished. Lots of consultant buzzwords about market synergies and digital transformation opportunities. The kind of language that sounds impressive in board meetings until you realize it doesn't translate into anything concrete that customers actually want. StreamTech's legacy infrastructure creates immediate optimization opportunities, he said, gesturing at a slide full of charts that somehow made firing people look like strategic genius. I cleared my throat. What about their customer retention rates? Their systems might look outdated, but their client relationships go back decades. Martinez barely glanced my way. "That's exactly the old-school thinking we need to move past, Tim. Customer loyalty is about value delivery, not relationship management." Rebecca Miller, our CFO, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd worked with me for 8 years before I stepped down, and knew I didn't ask casual questions during board meetings. When I brought up customer retention, it was because I'd already done the analysis. "Tim raises a valid concern about retention metrics," she said carefully, trying to bridge the growing tension. Martinez's jaw tightened slightly. "Look, I appreciate the historical perspective, but we can't make decisions based on how things worked 20 years ago. Markets move too fast for sentiment. Historical perspective. Like I was some museum piece offering quaint stories about the good old days." Gabriel Phillips, our board chairman and my longtime friend, attempted to smooth things over. "Ryan, I think Tim's point is that customer relationships are still valuable assets, regardless of the technology platform. And I respect that, Martinez said, managing to sound completely disrespectful while using the word respect. But sentiment doesn't drive shareholder value. We need data-driven outcomes. The room got quiet. Not the productive kind of quiet where people are thinking through complex problems. The uncomfortable kind where everyone knows someone just crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. I'd built this company's first major contract in 1991 by flying to Detroit in a blizzard to personally guarantee delivery when our biggest competitor's factory burned down. I'd mortgaged my house in 2008 to meet payroll during the financial crisis when banks stopped lending. I'd turned down 3 acquisition offers between 2015 and 2018 because I knew we could build something bigger if we stayed independent and focused on what customers actually needed. But to Ryan Martinez, all of that was just sentiment getting in the way of data-driven outcomes. Here's some data for you, I said, keeping my voice level and professional. Our customer acquisition cost runs 40% below industry average because we maintain relationships instead of churning through prospects. Our client lifetime value is 3 times higher than competitors because we solve problems instead of pushing products. Those aren't historical metrics, Ryan. They're current competitive advantages that took decades to build. Martinez clicked to the next slide without acknowledging anything I'd said. The dismissal was so casual it felt deliberate. The integration timeline shows revenue synergies beginning in Q2, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. That's when I knew we had a real problem. Nicholas Anderson, one of our longest-serving board members, leaned forward in his chair. What about workforce integration? StreamTech's engineering team has institutional knowledge we don't have in-house. Redundancies will be eliminated based on performance. Metrics, Martinez replied, without looking up from his presentation remote. We can't let legacy thinking slow down optimization. There it was again. Legacy thinking. Like the accumulated knowledge of experienced professionals was some kind of corporate disease that needed to be cured. I'd hired half the engineers he was talking about cutting. They were the ones who'd figured out how to make our products 20% more reliable than anything else in the market. But most of them were over 45, so in Martinez's world, they must be dead weight slowing down innovation. Performance metrics don't capture institutional knowledge, I said, trying to keep the conversation productive. Some of their senior engineers have been solving problems in this industry since before we went public. Martinez finally turned to look at me directly. His expression made it clear he thought I was wasting everyone's time. Tim, I understand you have emotional investment in past decisions, but we can't let that cloud strategic judgment. Emotional investment. That's what he called 32 years of building something from nothing. The camera kept recording. Every dismissive gesture, every time he talked to me like I was someone's grandfather who'd wandered into the wrong meeting, every moment of disrespect was being broadcast to investors who trusted this board to make responsible decisions. Victoria Harper, our head of operations, tried to redirect the conversation. Maybe we should discuss risk mitigation strategies for the integration. The risk is moving too slowly, Martinez said, clicking to another slide full of timeline charts. Markets don't wait for consensus building. That's when I decided to test exactly how much homework he'd done on this acquisition. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Not dramatically, just calmly, like I was checking some notes. The folder contained legal documents most people in that room had forgotten existed. What's the poison pill threshold on this deal? Asked. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. She knew exactly what I was asking. But she'd probably hoped it would never become relevant. Why would that matter? Martinez asked, his confidence flickering for the first time. Gabriel Phillips answered before Rebecca could respond. Any shareholder with more than 15% ownership can trigger protective measures if they believe management is acting against the company's long-term interests. Martinez's PowerPoint presentation suddenly seemed less important. That's a theoretical safeguard. No reasonable investor would actually use it. Reasonable is a subjective term, I said, keeping my voice conversational. The room was paying attention now. Real attention. Not polite board meeting attention where people checked emails while pretending to listen. Tim, Gabriel said carefully, you're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything yet, I replied, just asking about the mechanics. Martinez leaned back in his chair, trying to project the confidence that had been slipping away for the past few minutes. Are you threatening to blow up a deal that benefits every shareholder? I'm asking whether you think dismissing the experience and judgment of people who built this company benefits every shareholder. Silence settled over the room, the kind where you can hear the air conditioning humming and distant traffic outside the 47th floor windows. Patrick Sullivan, who'd been quiet through most of the meeting, cleared his throat. The poison pill provision requires a formal review process, doesn't it? Rebecca nodded, consulting her laptop. Any shareholder with qualifying ownership can request immediate suspension of major transactions pending board review of management decisions. Martinez was starting to look uncomfortable. This acquisition has been analyzed for 6 months. By McKinsey consultants who never spent a day in our industry, I said. By analysts who think customer relationships are just data points in spreadsheets. Those consultants have track records of optimizing companies they don't understand from metrics that don't matter. Victoria shifted in her seat. What specific concerns do you have about the acquisition structure? My concern isn't the acquisition structure, I said. My concern is leadership that treats experience as a liability and thinks respect is optional. Martinez stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back from the table. You're seriously going to tank an $850 million deal because your feelings got hurt? Wrong question, completely wrong question. My feelings aren't hurt, son, I said, deliberately using that word because I knew it would irritate him. But my judgment says this company is about to make an $850 million mistake, and I have a fiduciary responsibility to prevent that. Based on what analysis? Based on watching you dismiss every concern raised in this room. Based on seeing you treat experienced professionals like obstacles instead of assets. Based on 32 years of knowing that arrogance destroys more companies than competition ever does. The camera was still recording. Every word was going out live to institutional investors, pension fund managers, and analysts who made buy and hold recommendations to people whose retirement savings depended on companies making smart, long-term decisions. Martinez's face was getting red. This is ridiculous. You can't hold up a major acquisition because you don't like my management style. I can hold up a major acquisition if I believe management is acting recklessly, I corrected. And refusing to consider input from experienced board members while dismissing institutional knowledge as legacy thinking qualifies as reckless in my book. Gabriel looked around the table, reading the mood. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to discuss this privately. No need, I said, pulling out my phone. I've heard enough to make my decision. Martinez was staring at me like I'd just declared war. You can't do this. Actually, Rebecca said quietly, reading from her screen, he can. The poison pill provision is explicit about immediate suspension authority for qualifying shareholders. I dialed the number everyone in that room recognized. Our corporate legal department's emergency line. This is Timothy Johnson, I said when someone answered. Shareholder authorization code TJ7749. I'm exercising poison pill provisions on the Stream Tech acquisition proposal under Section 12.4 of the Corporate Governance Bylaws. Effective immediately. The voice on the other end confirmed receipt and asked for written documentation within 24 hours. Confirmed, I said, and hung up. The room had gone completely silent. Martinez was staring at me like I'd just shot someone. "You can't do this. I just did." Rebecca's laptop was already chiming with notifications. Stock alerts, legal confirmations, automatic triggers that kicked in when someone with 18% ownership decided management was acting against shareholder interests. "The deal's suspended," she said quietly, reading from her screen. "Poison pill provisions automatically halt all pending major transactions pending emergency board review." Martinez slammed his hand on the conference table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. "This is insane. You're destroying shareholder value over petty personal grievances. I'm protecting shareholder value from someone who thinks experience is a liability and respect is optional." My phone buzzed with a text from our head of investor relations. "Stock down 8% in after-hours trading. Acquisition suspension confirmed. CNBC requesting immediate comment." Nicholas Anderson was reading something on his tablet, his expression growing more serious by the second. "Martinez, you need to see this." He turned the screen around to show a Bloomberg terminal alert. "Johnson triggers poison pill at NorthTech Industries, 850 Nellis. StreamTech deal, blocked by founder concerns." The room went silent, except for the soft chorus of phones receiving notifications. Every major financial news outlet, every analyst who covered our sector, every portfolio manager who held our stock was getting the same alert simultaneously. "The board needs to convene an emergency session," Gabriel said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for serious governance matters. "Per corporate bylaws, management must be excluded from poison pill review proceedings." Martinez looked around the table, finally understanding that his authority had legal limits he'd never bothered to learn about. "You're all going to regret this decision." "Maybe," I replied. "But I've regretted plenty of things in 32 years of business. Letting arrogance destroy what good people built won't be one of them." He grabbed his presentation materials and headed for the door, stopping just before he reached it. "This isn't over, Johnson." "Yes, it is." The door closed behind him with more force than necessary. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. Gabriel looked around the table at the remaining 8 board members. "According to Section 12.4 of our governance bylaws, we now have 48 hours to review the triggering events and vote on management's fitness to continue with major transactions." "Do we need legal counsel present?" Victoria asked. "Already on the way," Rebecca said, typing rapidly on her laptop. "I've requested emergency session protocols be implemented." Patrick Sullivan raised his hand. "Before we proceed, I think we should review the actual footage from today's meeting." "The live stream recording?" Gabriel asked. "All of it. If we're going to make decisions about CEO performance, we need to see exactly what happened." Rebecca pulled up the video feed on the main conference room screen. There it was, in high definition. Martinez refusing to shake my hand, dismissing my questions as old-school thinking, treating my 32 years of experience like it was irrelevant nostalgia. We watched it twice. The second time, nobody said anything. "Motion to begin formal review of CEO performance during acquisition negotiations," Nicholas said. "Seconded," Victoria added immediately. "All in favor?" Gabriel asked. 7 hands went up. Only Jennifer Brown abstained, and she explained why. "I think we need legal counsel present before we vote on anything that significant." "Fair point," Gabriel said. "We'll reconvene in 2 hours with full legal support." I stood up to leave, but Gabriel stopped me. "Tim, you'll need to be available for the session. Your testimony will be crucial. I'll be in my office." The emergency session lasted 3 hours, not the 45 minutes I'd originally thought. Corporate governance, it turns out, requires a lot more paperwork than simple justice. I spent those 3 hours in my old office, technically now a senior advisor workspace, but still on the executive floor. My phone never stopped ringing. Reuters, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, every business reporter who'd ever covered corporate governance scandals. I didn't answer any of them. At 6:23 p.m., Gabriel called my direct line. "It's done," he said, exhaustion clear in his voice. Board vote was 7-1 in favor of immediate CEO removal. Who was the one? Jennifer. She wanted 30-day review instead of immediate termination. And interim leadership? Rebecca will serve as interim CEO while we conduct a proper search. Someone who understands that respecting your people isn't old-school thinking, it's basic management. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city lights beginning to flicker on below. What about the StreamTech deal? Dead until we have permanent leadership. The board wants a complete strategic review before we consider any major acquisitions. Good. Tim, Gabriel said, you know this is going to be a huge story. Martinez has friends in the media. They'll spin this as an old guard power grab. Let them. The camera footage speaks for itself. After Gabriel hung up, I sat alone in my office for another hour, watching the news coverage develop on my computer screen. CNBC had already run a segment titled Generational Warfare and Corporate America. Fox Business was calling it the handshake that toppled a CEO. But the story that mattered most was buried in the business section of the local newspaper's website. North Tech employees relieved by leadership change. Sources say Martinez acquisition plan threatened massive layoffs. Those were the people who really mattered. The engineers who'd built our reputation for reliability. The salespeople who'd maintained customer relationships for decades. The manufacturing workers who took pride in making products that actually worked. They were the ones who would have paid the price for Martinez's arrogance. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day. It was from Rebecca. Emergency leadership team meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Strategic review begins Monday. Thank you. I turned off my computer, picked up my briefcase, and headed home. The next morning's headlines were everything Gabriel had predicted, and worse. Veteran board member orchestrates. Corporate coup was the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Old guard strikes back against tech-savvy leadership ran in Forbes. The Financial Times went with poison pill politics. When experience trumps innovation. They all missed the point. This wasn't about age versus youth or traditional business versus innovation. It was about respect. And what happens when you think the people who built something don't deserve basic human decency? I spent the next week fielding calls from business reporters, corporate governance experts, and Harvard Business School professors who wanted to use our situation as a case study. Most of them asked the same question. Don't you think your reaction was disproportionate to a simple handshake? Simple handshake. As if refusing to acknowledge someone's existence was just a minor social oversight. Let me ask you something, I told a Bloomberg reporter during one particularly tedious interview. If someone walked into your newsroom and dismissed 20 years of journalism experience as legacy thinking, how would your editorial board react? She paused. That's different. No, it isn't. Competence doesn't have an expiration date, and neither does the requirement to treat people with respect. The story that really mattered, though, didn't make the financial headlines. It came from our employee satisfaction surveys, which Rebecca commissioned 2 weeks after taking over as interim CEO. 85% of our workforce said they were more confident in company leadership after the management change. The comments were even more telling. Finally feel like my experience matters again. New leadership actually listens during meetings. No more walking on eggshells around the CEO. Those were the people Martinez's arrogance would have hurt most. The 45-year-old engineers he would have fired for being legacy thinkers. The customer service reps who'd built relationships over decades. The manufacturing supervisors who knew how to solve problems because they'd seen them before. 6 months later, the full impact became clear. Rebecca had proven herself as permanent CEO. The Stream Tech acquisition was restructured as a strategic partnership instead of a takeover, and our stock price had recovered to pre-crisis levels. More importantly, we'd retained the institutional knowledge that Martinez would have thrown away. 3 of Stream Tech's senior engineers joined our team as consultants, bringing expertise that saved us 18 months of development time on our next product line. The legacy thinkers he'd wanted to eliminate became the competitive advantage that kept us ahead of companies that prioritized youth over experience. Martinez, meanwhile, landed at a consulting firm in Boston. Last I heard, he was advising other companies on organizational efficiency, helping them make the same mistakes he'd tried to make with us. Some people never learned that wisdom and arrogance can't coexist. The poison pill provision is still there, by the way, waiting patiently in our corporate bylaws for the next executive who thinks experience is weakness and age is obsolescence. Because there's always another Martinez coming up through the ranks. Another MBA who's convinced that disruption means disrespecting everyone who came before. Another young executive who thinks 18 months of authority makes them smarter than people who spent decades building what they're trying to run. They'll learn respect, or they'll find other jobs. I'm comfortable with either outcome. The handshake incident became something of a legend in our industry. Don't pull a Martinez became shorthand for treating experienced colleagues with dismissive arrogance. Business schools started using our case as an example of how quickly corporate culture can shift when leadership forgets that respect isn't optional. I still get calls from other board members dealing with similar situations. Young CEOs who think experience is baggage. Executives who confuse confidence with competence. Leaders who mistake age for irrelevance. My advice is always the same. Build safeguards while you can, document everything, and never underestimate the power of institutional knowledge. The people who built your industry didn't become stupid just because they turned 50. A year later, I was invited to speak at a corporate governance conference in Chicago. The topic was balancing innovation with institutional wisdom. Half the audience was executives my age who'd dealt with similar challenges. The other half was younger leaders trying to understand why experience matters. Innovation without foundation is just expensive chaos, I told them. And foundation without innovation is stagnation. The key is knowing the difference between what should change and what should be preserved. A 30-something CEO from a tech startup raised her hand. But how do you balance respecting experience with the need for fresh perspectives? You start by shaking hands, I said. Basic respect costs nothing, but the lack of it can cost everything. The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and the applause spread until the entire auditorium was standing. After the speech, that same young CEO approached me. I wanted to apologize, she said. I realized I've been making some of the same mistakes Martinez made. Not the handshake thing, but dismissing input from older board members as outdated thinking. Recognizing it is the first step, I told her. The second step is changing it. She nodded. Would you be willing to join our advisory board? We could use someone with your perspective. I smiled. I'd be honored. That's how change really happens. Not through corporate coups or poison pill provisions, but through one conversation at a time. One handshake at a time. One moment of mutual respect that bridges the gap between experience and innovation. Martinez never learned that lesson, but a lot of other people did. The briefcase I carried into that boardroom 18 months ago sits in my home office now, filled with thank you letters from employees who kept their jobs, consulting agreements from companies that value experience, and speaking invitations from organizations that understand wisdom doesn't have an expiration date. Sometimes I take out the poison pill documentation and read through it, remembering the day I had to use corporate governance to enforce basic human decency. I hope I never have to use it again. But it's there if I need it, because respect shouldn't be negotiable and experience shouldn't be dismissed. And sometimes, an old man's handshake is worth more than an arrogant kid's entire career. In the end, I learned that power isn't about the authority you hold. It's about the respect you show to others, especially when you think nobody's watching. The moment you stop seeing people as human beings worthy of basic dignity is the moment you stop deserving to lead them.